Hello, and thank you very much for tuning in to the podcast series by the New Silk Road Project. I'm your host today, Charles Stevens, the founder of the New Silk Road Project. This series is dedicated to understanding and raising awareness of one of the most important development strategies of the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative. The centerpiece of the New Silk Road Project, an initiative supported by Jeep, CSIS, Magellan Capital, the University of St Andrews and Shira, was to travel the course of the Silk Road economic belt from London to Yiwu in eastern China, interviewing the key actors and academics along its course. We will have to apologise in advance for some of the tangential moments in this podcast series, and also the variable quality of audio footage. We do hope this series sheds important light into China's growing global presence and the significant changes taking place across Eurasia. After leaving Duisburg, we headed to the capital of Germany, Berlin, where we had the pleasure to speak to Moritz Rudolf, formerly of Meritz and one of the most preeminent academics in Belt and Road law. He gave us a wide-ranging insight into the way that the Belt and Road Initiative is manifesting, focusing on the role of the Middle East in this equation.
Hi, it's really nice to meet you guys. The first time I heard about the Belt and Road Initiative was for a conference in Lanzhou, which took place in the spring of 2014. And I went there as a researcher with the MacArthur Institute for China Studies, MERICS. And this was a 1-week trip going to Dunhuang, going to Lanzhou University. And there was also a conference, a 2-day conference there. And this is the first time I heard about I really felt the energy behind the initiative. And what I found was really interesting about it was that you had most of the researchers came from Russia. And there were researchers not focusing on political aspects, but mostly on geology and climate change in history. And but then after that, I continued tracking and following the Belt and Road Initiative and moved back to went to China for several of those Belt and Road conferences that took place in 2014, 15, and so on. So I have been tracking the initiative from this think tank perspective since 2014. And in addition to that, I have been focusing on the way how China, through the Belt and Road Initiative, shapes the international legal order as a greater research project.
And something you have been involved in is founding Eurasian Bridges. Could you tell us a bit more about this and its aims?
Well, for Eurasian Bridges aims to, in popularized times as today, Eurasian Bridges aims to be like a neutral mediator between the West and China in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. Because I think there are misunderstandings, misconceptions on both sides. And what Eurasian Bridges does is by having a profound knowledge of the original documents of the Belt and Road, of the framework of the Belt and Road, and of the strategy of the Chinese government to put the Belt and Road Initiative into context. Eurasian Bridges assists decision makers, policy makers, but also companies to navigate through the grey zones that emerge when one is dealing with the Belt and Road Initiative.
And your time in China and also your academic studies have obviously informed you on the differences between Chinese and Western culture. What have your studies of Chinese culture helped you to gain about the Belt and Road?
Well, I think one of the key differences is something as boring as process. Like the process, the way how the Belt and Road Initiative is being promoted, I think reflects in its informal and to some extent flexible character Chinese views and Chinese culture to a big extent. For instance, you can see that like how the Chinese reform policy in the late 1970s, of having this policy experimentation of first providing a framework, like a vision, and then coming with more concrete steps as a secondary measure. I think this is something that is being now projected on an international level, which is really, really Chinese in that regard. And in addition, I think this flexibility that according on the circumstances, you assume a different role as a person, depending on your guanxi, but also depending on the country with whom you are selling the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think this is really Chinese to be this flexible, and we see that, for instance, when the Belt and Road Initiative is being promoted with a developed state, or for instance with Germany. There is a different story that is being told, what the Belt and Road Initiative really is. It's usually, well, we have Mr. von Richthofen, who coined the term Silk Road, a German historian, and then we talk about how to promote multilateralism together. But then if you go to Africa, for instance, to Tanzania, then the idea of how this initiative is being promoted, there's a different hat that is being put on. And I think this is by itself an extension of Chinese flexibility, and I think this is something that is genuine for Chinese culture, and now we see this emerging on an international level.
And on the discussion of flexibility, how do you distinguish between the Belt and Road and the older policy of going out?
Well, I think the difference is that going out, as you mentioned, it started longer before, and for going out, I think it was not as comprehensive as the Belt and Road Initiative is. The Belt and Road has, as you know, 5 main areas of cooperation, and I think the going out was mostly economic. But when we look at, for instance, the aspect of people-to-people exchanges and policy coordination, which is more on a more abstract level, this is something new. So maybe the aspect of connectivity, which is only one aspect of the 5 areas of cooperation, could be viewed as an extension of going out policy. But the Belt and Road is the umbrella for pretty much all the different foreign engagement within those 5 areas of cooperation. You know, it puts all of them together. So it's larger by design, and it has more areas that are part of it than going out.
And of the over 65 nations that have got involved in it, the US is still one of them that hasn't. How is this reluctance affecting its relationship with Western neighbours, which are becoming more aligned with BRI?
Well, I don't see right now the Chinese, the US government putting on specific pressure on countries because they are part of the BRI. I actually think that the current US government is not. I didn't hear Donald Trump commenting on the Belt and Road Initiative as of today. So I think there's maybe still a lack of awareness of this initiative by the current US government. This could change, of course. But at the moment, I don't think that it actually affects the U.S. Relations with any other states, because I think they're caught in bilateral issues at the moment, and the Belt and Road is not central to them at the moment.
And you don't see that as set to change?
I think it could potentially change. Yes, of course. Like if the U.S. president decides or realizes that China is increasing its global reach, then of course I can envision that he'll make this a political issue. And yes.
And focusing in on the Middle East, Ben Simpfendorfer writes about the increasing economic links between China and the Middle East. Strategy often goes hand in hand, if not precedes or follows economic links. Do you see this happening with China in this region?
Yes, of course, and I think especially with the Belt and Road Initiative as a catalyst for increasing the Chinese-Middle Eastern relations. I think you can see that clearly in regards to the first Chinese-Arab policy paper, which was published in January 2017. and which gives a clear indication of how China in the Middle Eastern region actually wants to promote the Belt and Road Initiative. And so there's this 1+2+3 strategy, which says that the main goal is energy, as like the main area of cooperation. Then there are the two wings, which are infrastructure investment and the reduction of investment and trade barriers. And then they also mentioned three breakthrough areas, three breakthrough technologies where China and the Middle East can cooperate. And those are civil use of nuclear energy, satellite technology, and renewable energy. So there you can see that the Belt and Road Initiative is becoming more concrete with its general focus on the Middle East as a region. There's this policy paper. China and the GCC have agreed that they want to cooperate in those areas. And of course, you have bilateral agreements between, or mostly MOUs between China and various Middle Eastern states to cooperate in the Belt and Road context. Most impressively, I think, in part of promoting this digital Silk Road, as Saudi Arabia and Egypt have already signed MOUs to cooperate and cooperate in this digital connectivity as it's envisioned by China for the BRI.
And as Chinese involvement increases, how do you think it will differ from US or European involvement that we saw in the 20th century?
Well, what the Chinese government says is that they want to have an economic globalization, which means that you have this interconnectedness on this economic level. So it is possible to still have some kind of dispute resolution mechanisms between China and Middle Eastern countries. But when it comes to political interferences or political interventions, the Chinese government, as of today, says that it is not interested in domestic affairs of a straight upholding the principle of sovereignty. So this is what China says is the difference between its vision of connecting the world, because it's apolitical, it's economic, the goal is common development, but political issues are just not regarded as that important, and China says that it doesn't want to interfere, and this being the main difference between the Chinese approach and the European approach or the US approach. The question is whether this is sustainable or not, but at the moment it's really easy for China to play this card.
And how is China balancing its engagement between culturally and religiously divided countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran?
Well, I think China is still in a capacity building mode when it comes to its Middle Eastern diplomacy. I think there are, of course, when you talk to Chinese diplomats, usually the best and the brightest, they go to, they speak English or they speak German, because they can then move between the embassies in areas which they really like. So if you're a Chinese diplomat and you speak German, then you move around between Berlin, Vienna, and to Bern, and maybe to the General Consulate in Munich and Frankfurt. So it's a really nice life for them as a diplomat. And so speaking Arabic was not, historically speaking, where you were sending the best and the brightest. But I think this is changing because there's just generally speaking more expertise in China on Middle Eastern affairs. And of course, there's been a long relationship between China and the Middle Eastern countries. But like those delicate measures of how to balance out in Iranian and Saudi Arabian interests, when China says that it does not want to interfere into the internal affairs, I think 2 years ago, when Xi Jinping postponed his visit to Tehran, to Riyadh, and to Cairo, he postponed it over 6 months. When you had a diplomatic clash between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I think that this showed clearly that China was not able to actually act as a mediator in those conflicts. But now, with China being one of the closest economic partners in terms of investment and trade in the Middle East, and especially with regards to Saudi Arabia and Iran, like actually having an opinion on those bilateral relations, this will be necessary for China. And at the moment, they just say they're just really abstract. Say, well, we call for restraint and we want to have peaceful consultations. But of course, at some point, China will have to become more active and clearly define its interests in the region. But I think it's just not there yet.
Thank you. And Zhejiang province acts as a geographical linchpin for BRI, or at least one of the major ones. How is radicalism and instability in the Middle East connected to that of the Zhejiang province?
I think for the Middle Eastern countries, Xinjiang, they say that it is important, but I think the current leadership of those Middle Eastern countries is really pragmatic. You see this with regards to the relations between like Saudi Arabia or Iraq and the Gulf states with the U.S. government, which has very anti-Muslim, a strong anti-Muslim rhetoric, but they're just really pragmatic about that. And I think with regards to Xinjiang with China, it's exactly the same thing. Because if you just look into the contracts that were, or MOUs that were signed between China and Saudi Arabia or the UAE in terms of military or intelligence cooperation, and law enforcement cooperation, which in the end enables China to get Uyghurs sent back to China, and those were signed with Middle Eastern, Sunni Middle Eastern countries. The only country that is difficult in that regard so far is Turkey. But I think at the moment pragmatism seems to prevail there as well. Erdogan hasn't been that outspoken in criticizing the treatment of Uyghurs in the past 2 years, but more open for Belt and Road investments, because they know that this is a red line when dealing with China. It's not written anywhere, but you just know it. This is don't talk about the Uyghurs.
And on the subject of the Uyghurs and people being sent back to China, as these links increase and intensify, can we expect a change in China's closed border policy?
Well, I don't see it happening yet. I think what the Chinese government or what Chinese think tankers say about the refugee crisis is, well, it was able to destabilize European democracies to some extent, because populist movements were able to gain support because of that. I think at the same point of time there is no real Chinese legal framework to deal with refugees, and so what China does in that regard is supporting more UNHCR, like the international the UN refugee structure monetarily. But at the same point of time, they send some more tents and they just try to support the international structures there, saying, well, we are upholding the international structures in that regard. But opening up its doors, I don't see this happening, especially with countries that are culturally so different. With Japan, you see exactly the same. Like Japan didn't accept that many refugees either. But and in addition to that, I think for the refugees, for them they also make a choice. Where do they prefer to go to raise their children? And I think at the moment China is not that attractive yet for at least for Syrian refugees. This could change maybe for African refugees if you look a long way down the line, but of course we're just speculating there that at some point when living standards in China are so high that it's actually this Chinese dream, which is an individual dream, to go to China and to actually succeed, then this could change. But I think we're also not there yet.
And I guess humanitarian aid can be provided in a variety of ways, but in terms of financials, the aid that China is providing lags a long way behind the UK, Germany, the US. Do you see this as something set to change?
Yeah, I see it increasing, and I see it particularly increasing within the UN frameworks, because for China, development is the key headline. Common development. This is what the Belt and Road Initiative is about. That people have a better living, and when you have like those crises where the refugees are they're most far away from development as possible, then I think we already see China being willing to increase its contributions, And when you look into UNHCR in particular, with the US government, saying that it wants to withdraw its financial contributions, and who to step in and be regarded as a savior of a really, like, just in terms of soft power. This is, for the Chinese side, this is one of the easiest wins they can envision, just like by increasing their contributions to the UNHCR. And they're already starting doing that. And I think this is going to increase even further. And in that regard, the Trump administration is a blessing for China.
And you've already answered my next question, but just to sort of probe you a bit more on it, China seems to be building increasingly strong links with German companies, and also Angela Merkel's response to the BRI over the last year has adjusted somewhat and has become more positive from what I understand. Do you think this will play a prominent role in how they choose to respond to the refugee crisis? Is Germany an important enough player to alter Chinese responses to it?
No, I don't think. Not because Germany is not that relevant, but I think there are two things there. I think, actually, I don't think that the German official stance on the Belt and Road has shifted that much, because there's been no German-Chinese MOU being signed, and from the German perspective, there's no willingness to sign an MOU yet with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. There are some companies, of course, that are moving ahead because they just know that they can gain from that. Like Siemens, for instance, it makes sense for Siemens to support the Belt and Road Initiative because their technology could be used to create connectivity in a China-centered network. So for Siemens, it doesn't matter. So I think there's some companies that are more interested in joining. Others, they are afraid because they see, they know, they're aware of the Made in China 2025 agenda, and they are just afraid that they will be driven out of the international and global market. So they're quite hesitant about that. So I think in Germany there are maybe two different views on how to deal with the Belt and Road in general, and I think that the refugee aspects there. I'm not even sure if there's a real dialogue between China and Germany on the refugee issue, because I think they're just not. It can be used as an argument against the Belt and Road Initiative, because you can say, well, if you create connectivity, then it goes both ways, and at some point it will lead refugees to come to go to the hub once the networks are built.
And shifting our attention further east towards Russia. Russia is becoming a more central partner in BRI and with China. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this will respect its principle of non-interference in the Middle East and also its approach towards the Syrian conflict?
Well, I think with regards to the Syrian conflict, there is if there's signs that there are some areas of cooperation between China and Russia. But for China, it's about rebuilding Syria after the war is over. And this is it fits perfectly with the vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, is to be able to rebuild the countries after the war is over. And in the case of Syria, this is just a matter of months, maybe it won't take that long for Chinese state-owned enterprises to come and move forward. Syria is officially part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese side subsumes them under that, and I think the Syrian side endorses the Belt and Road Initiative as well. So in that regard, to rebuild, yes, but in terms of military interference, I think there's no interest for China whatsoever to get involved in this conflict. Right now, it's the best position to say, okay, we want to have a diplomatic solution, we want to have friendly consultations, and respect the principle of sovereignty. And like the Chinese and the Russians, they have 2016 in June. For the last time, was it when they had like a common statement on the development of international law. And for the Chinese and for the Russian vision, the key part of the international order is sovereignty and upholding the principle of sovereignty. So I don't see. I think this is one of the areas where China and Russia they agree on.
And if you were going to select one country in the Middle East which would be most important for their success in the region in the context of BRI, which would it be for you?
Well, if we just say the Gulf states, then it's I think it's Saudi Arabia, and if we also include Iran, then it would be Iran.
Right. Okay. And in the next 5 years, what do you think will be the greatest challenge to the success of the BRI?
Well, I think the main question will be to establish mechanisms that enable interested states to engage with China in the BRI context on an eye-to-eye level. Like to have a structure that is as fair as China says that it wants the BRI to be. To have this a reality, because otherwise, if it is only China-centered, if it's just like a one-way street and it doesn't go back, and there are no like platforms where to interact on an eye-to-eye level, I think this initiative will face a severe backlash from other countries, which will say, okay, we also want to have connectivity and will promote connectivity, but we do it with different conditions, which are more sustainable and which could actually pose a threat for the success of the Belt and Road Initiative. I actually think this is quite possible.
And looking at public perceptions and awareness, specifically in Germany, how have they changed towards the Belt and Road Initiative in the last 5 years as well?
Well, I think in the beginning there was no awareness of it whatsoever. I think still there's not that much knowledge about it. And I think now in Germany, when you talk to the business community, they view Belt and Road Initiative as an extension of Made in China 2025. Although the Chinese government doesn't subsume Made in China 2025 under the Belt and Road Initiative. So everyone makes out of it what they want. And so for the German business community, I think Belt and Road Initiative is Made in China 2025. And for the policy circles, I think it's more this awareness. Belt and Road Initiative means China wants to shape international norms and structures and adjust the international system in a way that it caters to China's interests.
And if you were going to sum up BRI in one word, what is that word to you?
Network.